Now right now I completely understand if you're a little bit nervous as to where to park your money, what cards to buy, with prices being as crazy as they are right now. So with that being the case, I've thrown together a little list today of some of my most favourite cards from the era, cards that I think will pretty much hold their value. Even if there is a crash, I think these cards are pretty much safe, therefore you can have confidence if you wish to purchase these cards. Now I'm going to show you these in order of price. We're going to start from the cheapest and we're going to work our way up to the most expensive. Now, to kick things off, we have Fezandipiti from Shrouded Fable. Shrouded Fable, as we all know, has been regarded as one of, if not the worst set from the era, but that doesn't mean it doesn't contain some fantastic cards. For example, this Fezandipiti right here. Now, what does it for me is the background. It's a phenomenal illustration in the background there. And in my opinion, it's because it's Fezandipiti and it's because it's from Shrouded Fable that it doesn't demand a higher price. If this was Charizard or Moltres or some kind of flying or fire type there in center image with the colors in the background there, and if it was from a stronger set, we're talking about a very expensive card in my opinion. Let's say, for example, it's from Paldea Evolved and it was a Moltres there flying in the center with those fiery colors in the background. I think we're talking about a very expensive illustration rare card, but it's not. It's Fezandipiti from Shrouded Fable, which is why it only goes for $8.98 right now, which for me, in the current climate, with how expensive illustration rare cards right now, I think that's a very good price. And it's one that I just don't see falling. If it does, $1 or $2 maybe, but with how expensive illustration rare cards are right now, with how loved they're becoming, I only see this card moving in one direction, and that's upwards. That's becoming more expensive. It's a fantastic card, brilliant illustration rare card, and I only see it getting more expensive and not falling. Now moving on to the second card, I have a special illustration rare card, but it is a trainer card, and that's because it's Giovanni. Now Giovanni, as a lot of you may know, of course being Generation 1, nostalgia in play there, is probably one of, if not the most famous leaders of a villain organization in the entire franchise. Now this of course also comes from one of the most strongest sets from the entire era in 151. Now it's a beautiful card. As you can see here, sat there pictured by his side with his Persian, which, as we know as well, one of the most famous sort of pets, if you like, from the entire franchise. You very rarely see Giovanni without Persian by his side. Fantastic illustration card there. And as we can see, it has dropped off in value. As you can see, it did reach almost $40 and has dropped to around $25. So you might be thinking, if it's already fallen off, why are you including it in a video that's crash-proof cards? Well, that adds to it for me. If this card, such a beautiful card, such a loved card as this Giovanni Charisma is, if it's already fallen off somewhat like this, that adds to the crash-proofness of it, if you like, right? If it's already fallen to $24, I don't see it falling anymore. I do think this has now become a very safe investment. We're talking about a special illustration rare trainer card, a very strong set in 151. Bronze is probably not going to be printed anymore. Therefore, I think this has now become a very safe investment. I would have said it was, to be honest, around that mid-30s mark anyway. But now it's fallen to that mid-20s. I think we're talking about a card here that's only going to rise in value over the next few years. I think it's now become a very safe pickup. Moving on to the third card, we have Ninetales, and I've said about this card in many videos, it's one of my most favorite illustration rares from the entire era. So how could I not include it in a card that for me is very crash proof, as I think it's extremely undervalued and is only going to go one way in the future. Now, as we can see, it's from an Obsidian Flames set that I think it's starting to get its flowers. I think people are starting to appreciate some of the illustration rare cards in that set and how beautiful they are. Got the Houndour, for example, Ninetales, Gloom, and the list goes on. Now, as we can see from the price, it's similar to that Giovanni's Charisma we just looked at. It did reach mid-30s and has dropped to around mid-20s. Extremely similar to that Giovanni's Charisma card. But in my opinion, again, it adds to the fact that it's such a safe pickup right now. $25 for this Ninetales card here, one of the most beautiful, and in my opinion right now, undervalued illustration rare cards from the entire era, makes this card extremely crash proof. I don't see this Ninetales card, with how beautiful it is, dropping much lower than $25 US. I think, give it time, it's only going to go one way. I think people will soon wake up to how beautiful this card is. I absolutely adore it, and I think it's one of the safest cards you can buy right now. Quickly, before we move on to that next Pokemon card, guys, I just want to say a huge welcome to all of the new faces on the channel. It's so cool to see so many of you joining the channel. Thank you for your support, and for those of you that are not yet subscribed and you like the sound of a new TCG video every other day, please feel free to hit that subscribe button, as your support is massively appreciated And for all of you, if you are enjoying the video, please feel free to leave a like, as it really does help me out. Now moving on to the fourth Pokemon, we have one of the three kind of poster Pokemon from the X and Y era. Now if you're not aware, the XY era had Pokemon to represent the letters, so you've got Xerneas for the X, Yveltal for the Y, and Zygarde for the Z. Now, Yveltal, I don't think this card does it justice at all. Although it's a fantastic card, I think those are the kind of people from the older generation like me that aren't aware too much of those newer Pokemon. I implore you to go watch the anime or go play the games so you can realise just how cool Yveltal is. It's a fantastic Pokemon, it really is. Got a lot of aura about it, it really is an awesome Pokemon. Now, of course, dark flying type, which I think is really cool as well. And the cards, the colours in this background, just the design of it as well, with the way it sort of spirals and swells in the background, adding to the kind of focus of Yveltal in the middle there. I think it's a fantastic looking card. Now, of course, it's a legendary Pokemon as well. So the fact it's only $30 for a card as beautiful as this, a legendary Pokemon, a poster Pokemon of the entire era, for me is extremely cheap. I do think this card is one that's going to rise steadily with time. Paradox Rift as well. A set that just hasn't properly received its flowers. We know it's headlined by that Groudon card, but it's also got the Altaria EX card in there, as well as some other brilliant cards, and this Yveltal being one. I just think Paradox Rift eventually will get its day. People will wake up and realise how beautiful some of the cards are in that set, and therefore I think this card will climb with that set when it finally does. $30 really isn't a lot in the grand scheme of things. It's very cheap for a legendary Pokemon. Beautiful illustration rare card, and especially with the other illustration rare cards that are flying right now, when you look at, for example, the price of that Drowsy being double this, it really does make you think that some of these illustration rare cards are still very undervalued, and therefore I think this Yveltal card is a very safe pickup and one that I don't see crashing at all. Now moving on to the fifth card, we have Latios. Now for me, this is the better card of the two. Now if you don't know what I'm talking about, in Surging Sparks there's two legendary flying dragon Pokemon from Generation 3 in Latios and Latias EX. Now this is the Latias EX card right here, and if you want to complete that kind of picture, so to speak, you will also have to pick up the Latios card here. Now of the two, I do prefer the Latios card here. Now I've talked about why in another video, I won't go into too much detail. I just simply prefer the artwork in this card, but of course Latias EX being an SIR card, a special illustration rare card, means it fetches a higher price, it's a harder pull, etc, etc. But with this being $250, you'd expect this one to maybe be a little bit more, right? You want to complete the set of the two, complete the picture, they go hand in hand. Note, this one's only $37. Now, I'm not saying it should be $250 like the Latias EX, but I do think with the price of illustration rare cards being crazy right now, if we compare it to, for example, a card that I will feature later on in this video, another Generation 3 legendary in that Groudon from Paradox Rift going for $100 US, I think this Latios card is deserving of a much higher price than only $37. Therefore, it's very deserving of its place in this list, and I think it's a card that, as you can see here in this graph, it did drop to around 34, climb back up to 37, but I don't see it dropping really. I really don't. I think Surging Sparks is a very, very strong set, and there most likely will be reprints down the line which could affect the prices of these cards, but in general, long term, I think Latios is an extremely safe pickup for the aforementioned reasons. $37 really isn't a lot for a card as beautiful as this. Moving on to the next card, we have Raichu from Paldea Evolved. Now, as we know, Paldea Evolved, one of the best sets from the entire era. And of course, Paldea Evolved has a plethora of brilliant illustration rare cards, that Tyranitar, the Magikarp, of course, etc, etc. And I think they just overshadowed this Raichu card a little bit. Now, Raichu, as we know, the evolution of Pikachu. Now, Pikachu, of course, being the poster boy of the entire franchise. There's people that don't even know what Pokemon is, but know what Pikachu is. Therefore, Raichu, of course, has a certain pull to it, being the evolution line from Pikachu, being Generation 1, there's nostalgia in play here. There's a lot going for this Raichu card, but as we can see, only $50. I say only $50. The point is, we're living in an era where illustration rare cards are really picking up. People are starting to realize how good they are, how beautiful they are, and how undervalued they've always been. So with everything in play, how strong the set is, how strong a Pokemon Raichu is, etc, etc, I do think $50 is a good price for this card, and I do think it's not going to fall much below that. Maybe it'll fall off depending on reprints, etc, etc, but I do think with everything going for this Raichu, I do think is a card that could easily climb in the future, and it's just simply a very safe card to put your money in right now. Moving on to the next card, we have Gardevoir EX from Scarlet and Violet Base. Now, Gardevoir EX, this card right here is part of what I call story cards. Now, if you're not sure what I'm talking about, as you can see in picture here, Gardevoir is sat with what looks like an old couple. Now, to give you kind of context to what I'm talking about, if we look at the Ralts card from the same set, as you can see, Ralts is sat there with a youngish girl. When we move on to the Curlier, which is the evolution, you can see the girl grows up and has a baby of herself. And then, of course, Gardevoir being the last card from that story card of 3. As you can see, they're now an old couple, which is fantastic. I love this style of artwork. I love when there's a bit of a story behind artwork. I really do enjoy it. Now, of course, Gardevoir EX being a special illustration rare card, therefore, harder pull rates, harder to pull, therefore prices are higher for these type of cards. And as you can see, this is one of the main chase cards from Scarlet and Violet Base as well. Scarlet Violet Base also being a set that's starting to wake up a little bit. People are starting to kind of give it its flowers and realize that it is quite a decent set. So for a card as strong as this, as beautiful as this, and for a Pokemon as strong as Gardevoir being kind of the Alakazam from Generation 3, Generation 3 as well being a very strong generation, there's a lot of nostalgia in play there too. This card simply has a lot going for it, therefore $51 US for this card I think is very reasonable. I think it's a card that with time over the next few years will rise steadily as we move away from Scarlet and Violet era into Generation 10. I think this is a card that'll age well, and I do think $50 for this card is a very safe card to buy. Now the next card I want to showcase is this Roaring Moon EX card here from Paradox Rift. Fantastic Pokemon, of course, being the ancient form of Salamence from Generation 3. And I want to compare it to another card, another Roaring Moon EX card to be precise, and that's the SIR from Prismatic Evolutions. Now, say what you want about Prismatic Evolutions, of course it's been spoken about a lot in the last couple months. Say what you want about that, the set, the cards within it, the evolutions, etc, etc, etc. There's no denying it contains some beautiful cards, and this Roaring Moon EX card here is no exception. Now, of course, illustrated by the famous Shinji Kanda, who, if you don't know, did do the Magikarp from Paldea Evolved. He did also do the Magneton ETB promo from Surgeon Sparks, therefore, fantastic card, fantastic illustrator, very famous, very well known, but $240 is very expensive for this card right here. Does it deserve this price? With the dependables, with the factors to consider, the set it's part of, the illustrator, etc. That's up for debate. When you compare it to the price of this Roaring Moon EX card right here, which is 4 times less, and it's only $60, I don't know whether there should be that big a kind of difference with the prices, right? Yes, I would say this Roaring Moon card is a better card in general, should be more expensive with everything being considered, but I would say this card, when you factor in the price of this one, is a lot cheaper than what it should be. I'd say $60 is very cheap for this SAR card from Paradox Rift. I do think, give it time, as I said before, that Yveltal, Paradox Rift, I think will do well in future when people realize how good of a set it is. I think it's a little bit undervalued right now. Therefore, when people start to realize that, when Paradox Rift starts to climb in price, we'll see the cards within it also climb with it. As we know, there's a correlation between the price of a sealed product and the cards within it. So, Roaring Moon EX card, for everything I've just mentioned, I do think $60 is a very good price for this card, and one I don't think will crash at all, one I only see really rising in the future. Moving on to the last 3 cards, and the third one being Eevee from Twilight Masquerade. Now, I don't think we need to say a lot about Eevee. Eevee right now, especially due to Prismatic Evolutions, is one of the most loved Pokemon in the entire franchise. I don't think it's a flash in the pan. I think Eevee has also had a very strong level of desirability and affection from the community. It's always been a loved Pokemon. And when you've got, what, 8 or 9 of them here in the same card, such a beautiful illustration like this, I really don't think you can go wrong. Twilight Masquerade as well, a strong set, headlined by that Greninja EX card, of course. Very, very expensive SIR card, one of the most expensive from the entire era. It's just a strong set in general. Now, as we can see, falling off a little bit lately, it did break that $100 mark, fallen down to that 88, so falling off a little bit, not too much. But I do think, again, that bodes well. I do think this Eevee card, when we see the prices of other illustration rare cards, such as that Magikarp from Paldea Evolved going for almost $300, when you look at this Eevee card, I do think 88 seems very cheap. So, Twilight Masquerade as well, not the most oldest set, still relatively new in the grand scheme of things, only came out sort of in the latter part of last year. Probably going to get reprint, so the price of this card could fluctuate a little bit. But as I said, give it time, give it a year or two, even more. I do think this Eevee card from Twilight Masquerade has the potential to really, really fly. Not just hold its value. Of course, the point of this video being cards that I don't think will crash, right? I think they're safe investments, safe pickups. So I do think this Eevee card, give it time, will not just not crash, but also fly in value. I think it's a brilliant, brilliant illustration, a brilliant card. I don't think you can really go wrong with this Eevee card. Now, moving on to our penultimate card, we have Groudon from Paradox Rift. Now, I said earlier on the video when I talked about Yveltal and also the Roaring Moon EX, I will be covering Groudon, as I do think, despite it being $100 US, which is astronomical for an illustration rare, when you compare it to the others, I do still think it's quite undervalued. I do think we're talking about Generation 3, nostalgia in play, legendary Pokemon, highly desirable. Paradox Rift in general is a bit of a slept on set. I'm not saying it's the best from the era, no, but I do think later on in the future, Paradox Rift is a set that will get its flowers one day. People will realise that it is a stronger set than what I think people give it credit for. Therefore, when that happens, we'll see the cards start to rise within the set. Now, of course, when we see the Magikarp from Paldea Evolved going for almost $300, it makes you think there's plenty of room for growth with other illustration rare cards from the era, this Groudon being one. $100, when you compare it to that Magikarp, looks relatively cheap, right? Now, I do think this card will hold its value really well. Fantastic illustration, right? I love the stormy sky with the volcanoes erupting in the background. It suits the Pokemon within the card down to a T. It's just so Groudon, right? So I do think this card has a lot going for it, set up nicely for the future, and I don't see this card crashing at all. I really don't, despite it being very expensive, $100. Yes, I get it. I just think it's going to hold its value, and in time, in the future, will start to rise steadily. Now, the final card of the video being the Charizard EX from Scarlet and Violet 151. Now, 151 being one of the best sets from the entire era. It's a set that has so much importance as it brought a massive amount of people back into the hobby. Due to the level of nostalgia in play here being the original 151 Pokemon, of course people from my era, from those 90s, early 2000s, from the sort of late 20s to mid 30s era, they have come back into the hobby thanks to the nostalgia in play with this 151 set. And of course, when you're brought back into the Pokemon hobby, you instantly look for and gravitate towards your favourite Pokemon from your childhood. And for a lot of people, of course, that was Charizard. Now, of course, Charizard also being the chase card from this set, it's one of the most famous and most desirable Pokemon from the entire franchise. Therefore, it just has so much going for it. Now, of course, it is expensive. $300 is a lot for a single piece of cardboard. But when all these things considered, 151 probably not going to be printed anymore. Maybe if we're lucky, we get another run of some product, or maybe we get a new product like Blooming Waters was. Maybe, but I don't think so. I think we're done with 151. And when we're done with the printing of a set, we usually see prices start to rise quite a lot from both seal product and the cards within it. So Charizard being one of the best Pokemon from the entire franchise, one of the most loved, most desired, such a fantastic set in 151. And when you start to compare it also to other cards around a similar price, for example, the Bubble Mew Paldea and Fates, you look at also the Magikarp from Paldea Evolved, similar sort of prices. I do think this Charizard card is just the better of them. Therefore, I just see this card continuing to rise. I just don't see this card crashing for any reason at all. I really don't. I just think it's a card that's a very safe pickup and will just continue to rise and rise. So we've looked at Pokemon cards from $8 all the way up to about $300, ranging from illustration rares, special illustration rares, even trainer cards in there. Therefore, regardless of your budget or what you're looking for, you can feel confident that there is still cards available that are very safe pickups, and there's no danger really in them crashing in price. Let me know down below what your thoughts are on the cards I've shown today, which one your favorites are, which cards you've already got, or which ones you're looking to pick up, and your opinions in general on the cards we've looked at today. Anyway, that's been everything from me today, guys. So if you're still here and still watching, I really do greatly appreciate your support. Thank you so much for that. Please feel free to leave a like if you have enjoyed the video. And for those of you that are new and not yet subscribed, as I said before, please feel free to do so. I really would love to have you here. Guys, if you didn't check out my last video where I talked about illustration rare cards and how I believe they were just always undervalued and are now just finally finding the value that they deserve, you can check that video out right there. But apart from that, guys, that's been everything. Thank you so much for watching. As per usual, I've been PokeCharlotte, and I'll catch you in the next one.